Thanks everybody for coming out today. This is fun. I figured maybe if I put meaning of life up there, I might get a few people up there. Maybe we should have said hobbies and free food. That might have really packed the room. Isn't this stuff usually about code? I mean, what am I doing talking about hobbies? When they asked me to do this, I was like, oh, why me? Why should I even be doing this? Well, one of the things is I'm kind of arrogant, and so I like to talk. And but other than that, I actually have fears, doubts. I kind of don't actually necessarily know the meaning of life. I'm looking for it. Trying to figure things out. I'm human. I think all of us are human, last time I checked. And so that's what we do. We look for meaning. We look for things that drive us. And so let's talk about career for a few minutes. I got a big escalator there. And one of the things that struck me as I've been going through my career, and it's been a relatively long one, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, is that when I first started, there was this concept of an escalator. You get on the escalator and you put in your years and you get promoted to manager, and maybe after a few years as manager, maybe you get promoted to a director, and then maybe you get promoted to a VP, and you're kind of on this thing, and it's a path. And it's something that I think for many of us, our careers kind of define who we are. Think about it. When you meet someone for the first time, you ask, what's your name, and then what do you do? Right? It's definitional. It gives you meaning. It gives you something to talk about. One of the things I realized, though, maybe about a decade ago, is that escalator actually ends. There's a point at which you get off the escalator and there isn't an obvious next step. And I'm sure that point is maybe different for everybody else, but for me, I went through, did a bunch of startups and, got to a point where I was at, a VP level, and then it was kind of like, well, there isn't necessarily an obvious next step. I went off and I started my own company. I did the CEO thing, but then it's kind of like, well, where do I go next? What do I do next? And so what I realized is that career really isn't the meaning. And I've looked around and I've been working, and I have found actually a bunch of meaning in the stuff that I do outside of work. So let's kind of dive into a little bit of the topic. I said hobbies and the meaning of life. And some of you may be wondering, why the hell am I up here? It's like everybody has hobbies. Well, what's going on? Well, let's talk for a few seconds about what do I actually know about hobbies. So first of all, music. I play an awful lot of music. I've been playing music since I was about 3 years old. And I like to collect instruments, and I like to try to play everything that I collect. Right now I probably have well over 100 instruments in my house. I don't play reeds, but outside of that, I've got maybe half a dozen guitars, basses, electric basses, fretless basses, upright bass, flutes, whistles. I have Navajo whistle, kind of the two-bore whistle. Drums, hand drums. I have drums from Senegal. I have drums from Thailand. I have drums that my wife has made out of clay, Indian drums. I have a grand piano in the house. I just recently picked up the banjo. I've been playing fiddle now for a bunch of years. I actually play a bunch of these instruments professionally. I have a band called Organimatronic. We've played out all over the Bay Area for a bunch of years. Played the Maker Faire 3 times. I have 6 albums worth of stuff that I've actually pressed CDs and given out albums, sold albums. I play in musicals, so I picked up the banjo because in January I'm going to be playing in a production of Cabaret up at Hill Barn Theatre up in Foster City. I play Irish music. I've been doing that for about almost 20 years now. I play every week in an Irish session. I play for set dancing, where literally we're playing music and there's people dancing in a group. So I do an awful lot of music. Okay, that's one thing. I make things. Ready for this? So you guys, many of you know that is this going to actually work? You know that I knit. That was the first thing that I knit. That's my hat. That got me into things. Maybe I'm going to have to, okay, yeah, taffy, saltwater taffy. One guy brought in some taffy one day, and I thought, I wonder if I could make that. So I make that. Caramel creams, I love the caramel creams, and I try to do that. I do a bunch with baking and cooking. One day I thought, I wonder if I could make a boomerang and make one that came back. And so I made a boomerang, and it actually came back. I made a couple more. That's a bowed psaltery. It's an instrument. The psaltery's been around for a long time. The bowing part hasn't. Felted hat. After I started knitting and making hats, I had to make one out of felt. That's a trebuchet. Everyone has to make a trebuchet for launching pumpkins and other sorts of things. Oreo cookies. I was wondering, I wonder if you could actually make Oreo cookies. Turns out you can. The tops aren't exactly right. Oh, I surf, and that's a surfboard, and if you're a surfer, you have to know how to repair your surfboards. Haven't actually made one yet. That'll come. Sourdough bread. I started my own sourdough starter from scratch, and now I bake bread pretty much every week. I've got a weather station up on top of my house, built all of the mounting for it. That's the guitar that I'm working on right now. That's the neck, the headstock down there, made the truss rod, and that's the top that I am working on and thinning my way through. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, that's a microscope. Turns out that if you take the lens from a laser pointer and you embed it in some plexiglass, you can set your iPhone on top of it, and that's salt. And so it actually makes a really cool microscope. Oh, that's the hot tub that I just built along with the deck that I designed and built there. And that's the oven that I built that was right here that kind of died, but it actually made some pretty good bread. That's the boat that I built. It's a folding dinghy that fits in my sailboat. I built the oars too. That's the modular analog synthesizer that I built when one day I thought, maybe it was fun to go and learn about electronics. That's called a harp cora. It actually has strings on the other side, and you can play it with both hands. It's an awful lot of fun. That's a didgeridoo that I built. Ordered the blank from Australia. Oh, I built the table that's underneath the didgeridoo too. And that's the clock that I built a little while ago. That one I ordered some plans off the internet and put the whole thing together. So I make things, but yeah, that's not it either. So I also like to do things. You got a little bit of a sense that I sail. That's my boat. Have it up at Treasure Island, and I get out maybe about twice a month. It's really one of the more relaxing things that you can possibly do. I surf. I like to surf big waves, and that's a spot called Ross's Cove. It's near Mavericks. I've been surfing Mavericks for about 3 years now. I was out there last weekend in 20-foot surf. I compose music for the local Half Moon Bay Shakespeare Festival, and I did the sound design and music composition for this is A Midsummer Night's Dream. This was this year's production of Macbeth. And Midsummer Night's Dream was fun. That was the first time I composed for oboe, and did a bunch of stuff for this one too. That was fun. I'm a weather spotter, literally card-carrying National Weather Service weather spotter. A bunch of years ago, my wife and I signed up to be docents down at Año Nuevo State Park, and went through a whole course to go and do that. And there's some other things too. I'm really into astronomy. I've got a nice telescope at home. I do birding. I like to read. I try to read a couple books. I'm slow. I read only a couple books a month. Speak 3 languages, and I love to travel. So I know something about hobbies. So you might ask, why do you do all this stuff? What the heck is going on here? And there's a risk of being a dilettante, of just kind of, I just play around, I do some stuff, and I go only surf with Steve. To me, it's not about that. There was actually there's a guy named, anyone want to try pronouncing this? I believe, what's that? Yeah, there you go. Well done. I'm not even going to try it now. So the Happiness Project. So this guy, I think it was something like 20 years ago out of Stanford, I believe, set out to try and find what makes people happy. How do we do what makes people happy? And what he did is, at the time it was pagers, right? And so he gave everybody a pager, and at random intervals throughout the day, he did this with thousands of people, random intervals throughout the day, he would send them a page and say, write down what you're doing, right this instant, and tell me how happy you are. That's it. And he collected lots and lots of data over the years. And what he found out was that it's not what you'd think. It's not when someone was, you know, watching a TV show. It's not when someone had just bought something awesome. What makes people happy, the moments in lives, or the best moments in our lives, are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And he called this state flow. And it's real, and it's true. And you guys have all felt it too. When you have been on in your work, you have felt it. You have felt that, oh my God, it's amazing, right? And the interesting thing is that you can create that. You can find it. You can go off and do it. Anybody read Chinese or Japanese? So this is the character for road or way. In Chinese, my pronunciation's awful, Dao. And Japanese, Do. And so Taoism, it actually kind of comes through Taoism down into Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, into Japan, all these different ways. When I was in college, I took, you know, I'm a Japanese studies, Asian studies major, and did a course on you know, comparative religions over there. And Taoism really struck me. And there was this story, the story of Kuk Ting, that really struck me. And so Kuk Ting, there was this guy, there was a lord who was out in the countryside, and he came across this guy who was butchering a cow. And he watched him butcher the cow, and he said it was like a dance. It was the most amazing thing, just butchering a cow. And he said, how are you doing this beautiful dance? You would just dance, and the piece of the cow would fall away. And I'm going to read this to you, because this was really, really inspiring to me. It's so inspiring. I mean, this was 28 years ago, right, that I had this course and learned this, and it stuck with me all this time. And Kuk Ting said, all I care about is the way. I find it in my craft, that's all. When I first butchered an ox, I saw nothing but ox meat. It took 3 years for me to see the whole ox. Now, I go out to meet it with my whole spirit, and I don't think only about what meets the eye. Sensing and knowing stop. The spirit goes where it will, following the natural contours, revealing large cavities, leading the blade through openings, moving onward according to actual form, yet not touching the central arteries or tendons or ligaments, much less touching bone. A good cook needs sharpen his blade, but once a year. He cuts cleanly. An awkward cook sharpens his knife every month. He chops. I've used this knife for 19 years, carving thousands of oxen. Still, the blade is as sharp as the first time it was lifted from the whetstone. At the joints, there are spaces, and the blade has no thickness. Entering with no thickness, where there is space, the blade may move freely where it will. There's plenty of room to move. Thus, after 19 years, my knife remains as sharp as it was that first day. Even so, there are always difficult places, and when I see rough going ahead, my heart offers proper respect as I pause to look deeply into it. Then I work slowly, moving my blade with increasing subtlety until kerplop, meat falls apart like crumbling clod of earth. I then raise my knife and assess my work until I'm fully satisfied. This is a butcher. And the idea around kind of Taoism is that there's this way into betterment, this way into meaning, this way into enlightenment that can come from as mundane an activity as butchering a cow. And in Japan, many of you have heard of, you know, karate, right? And some of you may know that usually when they talk about karate, you'll hear karate do. And that do is that character, the way. It's the way of karate. But it isn't just martial arts, right? There's other dos in martial arts. There's judo, the way of technique. There's kyudo, the way of archery, the way of the arrow. But there's also chado, which is the tea ceremony, the way of tea. There's also shodo, which is the way of writing. The point is not any one of those activities. The point is that through dedication, through devotion, through attention, through flow, you can actually achieve meaning. You can achieve perfection. You can achieve enlightenment. right? You can become one with the Tao, right? You might have heard that. And you know, the interesting thing to me is I'm not actually a religious person, right? I'm an atheist, I'll admit that. This wasn't to me a religion. This was something that, wow, you know, we can actually find a way into perfection and meaning through our work, through the things that we do. And for me, I think that you can find that meaning by going out even beyond that work into the things that you might do in daily life. And so I will look out into the world and find out what's interesting. Well, so let me actually dive into this a little bit. Let's talk about how. How could you go off and do this stuff? How do you go off and find meaning? Because I think that there are actually a bunch of things, as I've thought about, you know, what kind of ties all of these different hobbies and everything together. And so for me, step one is be curious, right? I'm a parent. I've got 2 kids. And if any of you are parents out there, you may know that you love your kids, but they can also frustrate you enormously. And for me, the thing that frustrates me isn't when they're like bickering or fighting, or, you know, that frustrates me, or, you know, when they lie to me or whatever. One of the things that frustrates me most is I'm bored. Because we live in an amazing world at an amazing time. There is so much out there, and there's so much out to learn, and there are so many amazing things that you can find out about. And so if you're curious, if you read, if you go a level deeper, you can do amazing different things. For example, one of the things I haven't done yet, that's on my list, I keep these lists of things that are, okay, what's up next? I don't know if any of you have watched recently, but one of the interesting things in kind of amateur astronomy, and in the history of astronomy, one of the wild things is that many of the huge discoveries have been made by amateurs. Like when you get these, you know, comets with all the names about, you know, Comet Hyakutake a couple of years, you know, a decade ago or something like that. There was an amateur astronomer who found the comet. And so amateurs actually do an awful lot of the real work in astronomy. One of the cool things that people are doing right now is they're getting weather balloons and filling them with helium and launching them into the air. And what has happened recently is that you've been able to miniaturize computing power, and you've been able to miniaturize tracking. You've got GPS tracking, and we've got cameras, and we've got little, you know, instrumentation that you can put onto these things, and you can launch devices literally to the edge of space, and you can do it for a couple $100. And so you could read about that, and you could say, wow, that's kind of neat. You could also do it, right? It's a couple $100. You could go, and I'm going to go do this at some point. You can actually go and buy the thing. And so you can, through curiosity, dive into not just, oh, wow, it would be neat to see a balloon go up to the edge of space, but you can learn about astronomy. You can learn about space. Where is the edge of space? You can learn about what sorts of things are backyard astronomers doing. Like one of the things they're doing right now is they're sending up a ton of these balloons, and they're measuring cosmic radiation at various times, at various altitudes, and finding out what's going on. Share that and actually get involved in the world of astronomy. Other things about being curious, talk to people. Believe it or not, I'm actually an introvert. And it takes effort for me to go out and talk to people. If I'm left to my own devices, I'll be at home working on one of these hobbies. But over the past 4 or 5 years, one of the things I've been trying to force myself to do is whenever I see someone doing something neat, I talk to them. And you learn about it. So step one in how to do this, how to find meaning in your life through hobbies, is be curious. Step two, practice delayed gratification. We live in a culture, in a world, in a time where you can have anything now. But that doesn't provide meaning. I mean, so the interesting thing is that our culture is telling us that, buy it now, you'll feel better. Retail therapy, right? Go do it now. Go have the experience now. Go the fast way. Get there quickly. Do it more quickly. Be always in contact. If you're looking for meaning, practicing delayed gratification is an awesome thing. I said if you're looking for meaning, practicing delayed gratification is an awesome thing. So the idea here is that you can have all the things that you want, right? You know, that's not of a question. I'm not saying don't want things. Although if you talk to the Buddhists, they'll probably say that. That's exactly what they say. That's the root of all problems, don't want things. Actually, I think that if you want things, if you're going to try things, that can be great, but you can actually use those times as a place where you can go out and get meaning. And so, for example, a sweater. Right? Yeah, earlier the question came up, did you knit this sweater? Yes, I knit this sweater. And as a matter of fact, I made all the buttons too. If I wanted a sweater, I could go buy a sweater. Right? People often say to me, will you knit me a sweater? Could you knit me a sweater? Knit? My answer to that, has anyone in here asked me that? Okay, my answer to that is knit your own damn sweater. Because if you want a sweater, take $50, $100, $200 down to Target, get your sort of nice shop, go to Stanford Shopping Center, get whatever sweater you want. If the point is wanting a sweater, you can have a sweater, you can have it right now. I don't need to give that to you. The value in a sweater is actually the time. I joke, you know, knitting is meditation at the end of which you get a sweater. The value is in learning this thing. Now, if you look at this thing, we're going to pause for a second here. So by delaying gratification, what did I get to do? I got to not only go through all of the knitting of this, but I got to think about knitting this. I got to think about the design of it. Right? I designed it. I made it up. And so I got to learn that, you know, that's called a Shetland weave. I got to learn that this is the popcorn stitch, and there's a certain way to do that stitch where you bind a bunch of stitches together and then you skip a bunch of stitches in the next one. And I got to learn that this is called a shawl collar, and that you actually have to go and pick up all the stitches along the edge with a really long needle, and then you have to knit back and forth here a bunch of times to kind of make it bigger up here, and you can do that. I got to learn how to do a buttonhole. And how to make it so that the edges of the buttonhole are going to hold on tight. And I got to learn about making buttons. And, you know, I kind of winged it a little bit too, right? I was making my guitar. You saw my guitar that I'm making up there. I had some veneer, some Indian rosewood veneer. I was like, oh, that might go with this sweater pretty well. And so I got to actually go and spend some time making them. By not giving in to the desire to have something right now, I had months of experience that I can remember my entire life, that enrich my life, that I can talk about, that I can share with people, that actually give me meaning. And the same is true across the board. Another one of the hobbies that's coming up next is bicycles. So my son came to me and said, hey, Dad, let's go buy an old car and fix it up together. And I took a really big deep breath, and I was like, all right, I'm going to have an old car sitting in my driveway forever. And I said, well, tell you what, Finn, before we do that, let's actually see if you can finish a project, and let's start with something smaller, bicycles. So I went out and actually bought a welding kit, and I bought some of the material, and we're going to go and put bicycles together. And the idea there is, once again, if you want a bike, you can have a bike, but I can actually now have, you know, months of experience with my son learning how to weld. I get to teach my son how to weld, and putting these things together and learning how it works. We can go on this one. I wonder if I can go to the next slide. Right. So ask yourself that question all the time. Right. I mean, that to me is one of the fun questions where, you know, like that taffy thing. You know, when my friend, you know, brought some taffy along on the trip, I was like, I like saltwater taffy. I wonder if I can make saltwater taffy. And so that thought then, you know, set up, actually I did it, I think 2 or 3 times. I found out some really interesting things. So, you know, that when you're making it, you actually, it's just sugar, water, and some butter and stuff like that. And the whole point is getting the sugar up to the right temperature. And when you get sugar to a first level of, you boil it and you boil it and you get it to a first temperature, well, it's going to have a fairly soft consistency. If you keep going, it gets harder and harder and harder with candy. And then the whole thing that really makes things chewy is that whole stretching action, is you're kind of creating lots of little bubbles and things like that in the sugar, and that you have to keep stretching it a whole lot in order to make it really soft and retain its chewiness. And you got to do it while it's warm. What I learned is that if you do it when it's too hot, you burn your hands. And when you pick the thing up at the first time, it doesn't feel all that hot. But after you're like stretching it for a while, you're like, ow, and your hands burn. But wondering, I wonder if I can, is what started me on a whole lot of different things. I tossed up the synthesizer up there. So I'm a musician. I've loved music forever. I've loved electronic music forever. And synthesizers, I don't know if any of you are into them, they're actually pretty expensive, particularly old analog ones. They're hard to find and they're expensive. And a while ago, I was in, maybe even 20 years ago, I was in a music store up in the Haight. Moog had come out with, Moog is the famous synthesizer manufacturer. Robert Moog was the one who made the first modular analog synth. They gave it to the Beatles. They created, what was the album? Abbey Road or something like that had all the wild synth sounds on it. Ta-da, Moog. They came out with these pedals, guitar pedals, for guitarists. And there was one called the Murph that actually took a resonant filter, that's the Murph in Murph, and put a little sequencer along with it, and so that as you played your guitar, you got this really wild, trippy step pattern through the resonant filter. It was awesome, and it was expensive. I was a starving student at the time. It was like $400. And so years went by, and I thought, I wonder if I can make a synthesizer. And so after that, literally just hundreds of hours and hundreds of yards of wire and buying electronics for dummies and learning all these things. I made a synthesizer and I made a pair of 16-step sequencers, and now I can play my guitar through it. And I can make some really cool sounding stuff. And so I wonder if I can. Make it. Don't buy it. So any of these things, right? Like I said, sweater, you could buy it, go make it. Anytime I have the urge to go buy something, I usually check myself and say, but could I make it? The one thing I do let myself buy is tools, because when you're buying tools, you're buying the things that will give you experience, that will give you the fun of going and doing the things and make it. So actually, I have a note here that says clock. That clock that I built, there's a wood store in Half Moon Bay that's about to close, so if you want to see it, you got to go quickly. It's a fine woodworking shop, and when we first moved to Half Moon Bay some 20-odd years ago, we went into the shop, and they had this tall, pedestal-built grandfather clock, all made out of wood, and I thought, wow, that thing is beautiful, and it cost like $10,000. It was just, amazing. And I was thinking, that's an incredible thing. I like to buy art. I think that, it's great to support artists, and, art beautifies our lives and all that. And so we thought about, maybe buying the clock. But then, a bunch of years ago, I thought, I wonder if I could. And so instead of buying it, I made it. And now I've got a clock that not only do I have a clock that's made out of wood that I can say, look at that cool clock made out of wood, I can also have the pride of having made it. Another one of the secrets that I've learned, this is a huge one. The hard part in all of this is say you're going to do it. Say to yourself, I'm going to, and then do it. And then tell everybody you know. So anybody who knows me knows that I talk about this stuff a lot. And that I'll often be saying what the thing is that I'm working on right now. Like right now, I'm working on an acoustic guitar. It's a 12-string guitar. It's going to take me forever. But I tell everyone that I know that I'm going to do it. You know why? Not because I'm arrogant and an asshole, maybe. But I do it because when I tell everybody, I'm now creating pressure. I'm creating the fear of public failure. And I do fail publicly from time to time. But this is just an amazing tool. It's incredible the power that is in this. As a matter of fact, there's something called NaNoWriMo. Has anyone ever heard of that? National Novel Writing Month. I think we are in it right now. The whole thing is, a while ago, someone, I don't even know who came up with it, said, you know what, I want to write a novel, and maybe we should get a bunch of people together. Let's go write a novel. And so let's create a month. Let's call it National Novel Writing Month, where people can declare publicly, I'm writing a novel. And the goal is write 50,000 words in the month of November. It doesn't, I mean, nobody checks, right? There's no quality thing. There's no, you could write 50,000 times and say, I did it, I wrote 50,000 words in the month of November, right? No one cares. The point is, it's a place where you can declare publicly and get the support of the community to help you do this thing that you want to do. I did that one year too. And it was incredibly fun. I thought to myself, yeah, I want to write a novel. A friend of mine had talked about doing this thing, and so I said, I'm doing it! And I went off and I did it, and it was really hard. And it's still in pieces. What they don't tell you is that that's a first draft. Actually getting to a full novel is like 10 times that amount of work. So I'm telling you that maybe someday I will finish that novel. Declare goals, tell everyone. Then cut yourself some slack, okay? It is okay. I mean, I guess the other way to think about this is be okay with not being done. Okay, not being done doesn't mean you failed. Not being done means you're not done, and that you can still go and do the thing. That clock that you saw, I started it off, and then I put it aside for literally like 2 or 3 years, and it was always in the back of my head, like, I'm not done yet, I'm not done yet, and am I going to give up on that clock? And because it was really hard. But I came back to it, and eventually I finished it. Cut yourself some slack. The things that you want to try, if they're worth doing, they're probably going to be hard. And doing the hard things, if we go all the way back up to flow, that's where you get meaning. That's where there's the real fun. That's where the great stuff is. And so it's okay if in trying hard things, you're not done yet. Sometimes things take a while. My boss, Simon, when he hears about some of the stuff that I do, he's always like, where do you find the time, right? I find the time by not setting deadlines. I find the time by being okay with not being done yet, by declaring to everybody, I'm doing these things, and then having them take as long as they're going to take. And then what you find out is that if you adopt that mindset, eventually finish things. And if you do it, over time, eventually finish an awful lot of things. It's a lot of fun to finish them eventually. Secondly, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There are places in this sweater where I can show you mistakes. There are bunches of them. In everything that I do, there's mistakes. In the music that I record, there will be things where it's just like, oh yeah, there's that mistake. Nobody else knows them. I know them, but because I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I let them go. There's a guy, I do a set building off at some local theaters and with the Shakespeare Company, and the guy who's the master set builder is a guy named Paul Smith. His motto for set building is, if you're not going to notice it from 25 feet away at the back of a moving horse, it doesn't matter. Okay? Because the point is, we're putting on a play here. We're having fun. So, cut yourself some slack. It'll help you get things done. It'll help you actually go off and do this whole kind of hobbies and the meaning of life thing. Next thing, don't do. The way to do this stuff, the way to go find meaning in life in there, is to not do stuff. My wife is maybe not so thrilled about some of the things that I don't do. But the way that I think about it is, okay, I'm a bit of a slob, but I'm a purposeful slob. So I'm considering that probably earns me some points. There are things that make us feel like we're accomplishing things. Maynard Webb, our chairman and great mentor and friend of mine, says never confuse action with traction. It's really easy in our lives to go and do stuff and to feel busy. There's even the whole joke, Jesus is coming, look busy, right? It's really easy to convince ourselves that we're busy, that we're doing stuff. I have 0 inbox, I did it. Ask yourself, are the things that you're doing and the things that you're spending a bunch of time on, are they giving you meaning? Are they giving you purpose? Are they fulfilling you? Are they letting you accomplish the things that you really want to accomplish? And if they're not, don't do them. Kelly Hirano, the guy who runs engineering for sports, I can just give him the willies so quickly by just showing him my iPhone. I got all these red dots all over the place, and if you look at my my personal email, I think it says, what does it say? It says, let's see, 77,246 unread messages in my personal email. And my work email, I just haven't been here quite so long, so it's not quite up to that point yet. And that doesn't mean that I'm inattentive, and that doesn't mean that I don't care, and that doesn't mean that I'm not responsive. I actually think I'm moderately responsive. I wish I were better. But what it means is that I don't waste any time deleting emails. I don't waste any time filing emails, because you know what? I figured out how to deal with it otherwise, because I got better things that I want to be doing. The same thing can be said of, perhaps, I don't know, pick 'em, whatever it is, cleaning around the house. It also relates to things that you pick up, right? So there are things that I've picked up along the way in terms of, hobbies and stuff like that that I just don't do anymore. So that I can go off and do other things. Like there was a phase where I was into stone carving. And did, got the tools and, bought a bunch of stone and did a bunch of soapstone carvings, and it was a lot of fun. It was actually right after my kids were born. I couldn't make a whole lot of noise with music and everything like that, and so I said, all right, let's do something that's creative, that's quiet. And that was that. But I don't do that anymore. I gave it up. I moved on. I let go of it. So one of the big keys to accomplishing stuff is to not do things, to let go of things. Don't care what other people think. I sit in the front of FYI every week knitting. Do you think I care? I sit in bars and knit, right? So knitting is not a typical masculine activity. I don't know if anyone ever told you that. I get a lot of crap about it. But by not caring, by just saying, look, this is fascinating to me. This is something that gives me joy and pleasure. I'm doing it because I want to do it. Not caring what other people think, not letting other people judge me. I'm hard enough, judge myself. And so let go of that. Don't care what other people think. It'll let you do stuff. All right. So all this stuff, the big picture. So we live in uncertain times, in case anyone hasn't been watching the news over the last week. And I don't know about you, one of the things that I feel is that when you feel a lack of control, when you're living in uncertainty, like all of us here at Yahoo are living in uncertainty, that gets you down, gets me down, right? And you feel a sense of angst, you feel like you don't know what's going to happen. It can be frustrating, it can be scary. What I find is that when you take control, it can give you comfort. That even if it's in something so small as I'm in control of that guitar project, it's a tiny thing, but it gives me comfort. It's something that I feel like it's a positive thing that I can do in the world. I can create one more thing that might be kind of neat. For there to be in the world. Or I can learn about something, or I can talk about something with someone else. So in these unsure times, focusing on the flow, focusing on the Tao, focusing on doing things can be really empowering. Second, in work, right? We can't always control when we're going to get that next promotion, when we're going to be moving up the escalator. In fact, there is no escalator. What we can do is we can find the importance and the meaning in the mundane. right? I chose that Cook-Ting thing for a reason, and so did Chuang-Tzu, the Chinese philosopher 2,500 years ago or whatever it was. He chose that one, not some high art, for a reason. The reason is that there is meaning where you find it. There is meaning by being all in, by being engaged, by being curious, by interacting with the others, by sharing passion, by sharing curiosity. And you can do that no matter what job you have, even if you're a butcher. And so in our world, in our time, when, you know, am I going to get that next promotion? Find the meaning in what you're doing. Taking control gives comfort. I love doing this stuff. I'm going to keep doing this stuff. To me, it's something that has helped me find meaning. There is method to the madness. It's allowed me to lead a rich life. You ask yourself, what is a rich life? To me, that if I didn't have any money or any job or anything, I would still find a lot of fun things. Like I could still knit. Doesn't cost that much for a pair of needles and some yarn. And so there is a path to some interesting stuff out there. And I wanted to share that with you guys. I really appreciate you coming out and spending some time listening to this. If you got any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks. Yes? Oh, you're going to do mics around?
All right, great talk, man.
Thank you.
A lot of inspirational stuff there. I just wanted to ask you, you had 2 points. One was don't care what others think, and then another was go out and tell others what you're doing. So if you don't care what they think.
Aha, you caught it. What I meant is don't let others be your critic, right? Don't let others stop you. I didn't at all mean go into a bubble and don't care about others. I actually, you're right, I totally care about what others think. I mean, the first thing that, when I make anyone who knows me, anyone who knows me, I show it to them. I'm wearing the sweater I made, right? I care that people, see the sweater. And that actually is a big part of, the enjoyment in all of this and some of the meaning of all of this. I get to talk about the things that I've found engaging and that drive passion in me, and I get to share some of that with other people. So absolutely I care what others think, but I'm not going to let anybody say that's dumb, right? Why are you doing that? I'm doing that because I care about it and I want to do it, and I'll tell you why it's super cool, and if you don't think it's cool, that's fine. I'm not going to let you stop me, but I do care, and I want to share this stuff. Question over here?
Hi, as a fellow knitter, thank you for being a male knitter.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Men are actually the first knitters, so you're carrying on a proud tradition.
Yeah, and in Ireland, it's mostly the guys who do it. Yeah.
My question was, how do you sort of organize and prioritize your time and responsibilities? I think it's hard to, it's easy to show up to work and just work constantly and then not really make time for other things. So what's sort of your philosophy or approach on that?
Yeah, Stephen Covey. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective. I've never read it, but I'm told that he tells a story, the parable of the rocks. Have you guys heard the parable of the rocks? Who has heard the parable of the rocks? Okay, then I'll tell the parable of the rocks. All right, so a guy who's talking about time management comes up to a class and says, all right, I'm going to talk to you about some time management. And he pulls out a jar, and he sticks the jar on the desk up in the front of the class. And he pulls out a bag, and he pulls out of the bag a rock. And he puts it into the jar, and he fills up the jar with rocks. And he says to the class, okay, is the jar full? The class says, yeah. The guy pulls out another bag, and it's got pebbles in it. And he pours a whole bunch of pebbles into the jar. And he says, okay, is the jar full? And the class is like, no. And he's like, all right. And he pulls out another bag, and it's full of sand. And he pours the sand into the jar, and it fills in all the spaces around the pebbles, around the rocks. And he says, is the jar full? And the class says, no. And he's like, you're right. And he pulls out a pitcher of water, and he pours water into the jar. And he says, great. Now, what's the moral of the story? And someone puts up their hand, and he says, ooh. And the guy says, there's always more space in the jar. And the guy says, no, that's not the moral. The moral of the story is put the big rocks in first. And so I mean, I tell this to any product manager that I work with. You got to put the, so it's totally matters for teams and for programming and for everything, but it matters for life too. You got to figure out what are the things that you really are really important to you, and you make time for them. And so for me, my family, my work, all of that is really important. I make time for it. But this stuff is also really important, so I make time for it. And if you remember the whole be okay with not being done, part of the making time for these sorts of things is they can't be on a schedule because the other things have to be. My kids, I gotta get them to school when they have to get to school. These things I can get done whenever I get done. But you've noticed I knit at FYI. I actually knit in meetings, right? So these are things I do that because turns out that when you open a computer in a meeting, you get distracted immediately and your attention goes elsewhere and you're no longer in the meeting. But when you're knitting in a meeting, you can follow everything that's going on, you can totally pay attention to what people are saying, and you get to feel like you're actually still being productive, which is why you opened a computer in the first place. But so you can find ways to go and do things. You can find the things that you're going to let go of. I don't spend a whole lot of time. I mean, I watch some TV, but I'm not up on all the latest shows. Like you'd be shocked at the things that I haven't seen. So I don't know. That's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Great talk.
Thanks.
One of the questions I had is around the Tao of Chef Ting.
Yeah, Cook Ting, yeah.
There was this idea that there was a person who was so good at something that it eventually became almost second nature, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things you must go through is that when you want to try a new thing, you're sort of fumbling through it, and there's no way you get to that point anytime soon.
Yeah.
So, in general, how do you balance the idea that you want to be in that mindset versus you want to try a variety of things?
I'm glad that you asked, because this is really important. Flow, the Tao, is not about the being perfect. It's about the striving. It's about the learning. It's about the process. And so part of the joy of actually the delayed gratification is recognizing that you'll get there eventually, but it's fun all along the way. When I started surfing, surfing is the hardest sport I have ever done. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried it, but it's really, 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 really hard. So it took me probably about 25 times, 2 hours each time, of throwing myself at the ocean and having the ocean throw me back before I could actually even stand up reliably. It took me about 7 years before I could do a decent cutback. And it took me 17 years before I had gotten up the courage to go and surf Mavericks. These big, so takes a long time. Another example of this is, so 4 years ago, I started playing the fiddle. I play Irish music. I had started on the mandolin. In Irish music, there's a whole bunch of expression, and it's all about kind of the pulse and the feel and the ornamentation that you can do. And you kind of just can't do all that stuff on a mandolin. You need an instrument that's either like a flute or a fiddle. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to try and learn the fiddle. And when I first picked it up, I was awful. I mean, it was so painful. I used to joke with the kids. It's like, okay, Dad's going to go kill some cats for a little while here while I went off and practiced the violin, because it sounded exactly like that. And not only that, when I started the fiddle, I figured, all right, I should probably, most of the instruments that I play, I wasn't, taught. But I said, all right, I'm going to go find myself a teacher, because this one's really hard. It's the hardest instrument I've ever played. And when I went to the teacher, not only did I sound awful, but I, a musician who's been playing music since I'm 3, who have done it professionally, who's been good at almost every instrument that I've ever picked up, sounded awful in front of another musician who I respected. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, was to go there and to be awful. So if you can get over that, there's reward in it, right? That was ego. That was there was no one else who was saying, you're awful, you should stop, to me other than me, right? And so just like I don't want to let other people tell me what's bad, in that case I had to not let myself tell me it was bad and to get over it. You can do anything you want to do. When I left LiveOps, this company that I helped start a while ago, Maynard, our CEO, sent me around to a bunch of VCs saying, go talk to them and, they'll talk to you about portfolio companies and maybe you'll find, the next thing you want to do. And I went to one of the VCs, a guy named Jim Watson at CMEA Ventures. And he didn't say, here's my portfolio companies, pick one and I'll do introductions. He said, what do you want to do? He said, tell me 5 years out from now, you've all heard this, where do you want to be? What do you want to think? But he said, he didn't let it just be flip. He didn't let it just be a trite thing. He said, no, I want you to sit down and say, when you wake up in the morning, what do you see? Where are you? Are you in the house that you're in right now? Or are you in an apartment? Are you in the city you're in right now? When you leave the house, are you going to work? Where are you going to work? Is it in an office? What sort of office? Are you working with other people? What type of things are you going to do? When you look back over the previous 5 years, what did you get done? What do you want to accomplish? He said to me, you're good. You're one of the good ones. And you guys are all good. You're all one of the good ones. You can do anything you want to do. Anything. And people will help you do it. You got to decide that you want to do it. You got to figure out that you want to do it. And then recognize that it's going to take effort, that it's going to take time, that it's going to be hard, but that's the point. That being hard is where the meaning is. That's where the fun is. That's where the flow is. It's not the having, it's the discovering. It's the learning along the way. So I mean, that's totally, absolutely 100% part of it. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's really, really hard, but you can do it. And by telling people, I'm going to do this, that's how you get yourself, you build yourself a coaching staff to get you over the humps where it's going to be hard. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? We got some time. A couple more. Nobody? One? Yep.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
What advice would I give to my 25-year-old self? When I was 25, I was living in Japan, and the advice that I would give is get more out of it. Go talk to more people, learn more about the arts, and learn more about the things that you can learn when you're here. I don't have many regrets at all. The thing that I do regret is that the opportunities that I missed to learn, to try harder, to do bigger things. That's what I would tell myself. Yeah. Got another one?
Sure, I can go again. I'm also introverted. I'm sure many of us are.
Introverts of the world, don't unite. Go home and sit.
I know. How do you, I think it's really important to talk to people, I agree. How do you sort of push yourself out there and find these people to talk to? Is it approaching strangers, or is it
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, the place, if anyone didn't hear, how do I go, if I'm an introvert, how do I go find the people to talk to? A lot of it is just talking to strangers. Another one of my issues, one of the things that I deal with is that I can get frustrated and grumpy. And I've had people tell me, we don't like you when you're like that. And the same person told me, when you're on, when you're passionate, when you're on fire, it's amazing. It's super fun to watch. But when you're grumpy, man, you're just awful. And that was one of the best things anyone ever told me. And so the way I'm working on it is I'm just really trying to be positive. And part of that is I'm trying to, say hi. And so last night I was coming home I was in Detroit yesterday meeting with a client. On the flight on the way home, I said hi to someone, and I got to learn about this woman who had just spent the last couple months volunteering for the DNC and kind of, you know, her thoughts on politics and what it was like to, you know, work in the campaign. You know, another example of that was I was out there's an event in Half Moon Bay called the Dream Machines event, and so I talked to someone who, you know, does remote control planes. And I learned about how they fly remote control planes and that they do it down south of town, and that, you know, anytime you want to come out, you know, come out over there. I mean, if you just open up and, you know, if you see something that's interesting, raise your hand, go talk to them, go say hi afterwards. It's hard, but it's always paid off. Sometimes they'll say, I don't have time. Then you haven't lost anything. One more? Okay. Thanks for listening, guys. That was fun. Thank you.